I feel marginalised, ridiculed, and even bullied on the roads driving an EV. Yep, after more than 25 years of driving around in ICE cars, I finally switched to an EV last year. And in these few months of ownership, I felt like I haven't been welcome on the roads, especially with the Chinese EV that I'm driving. I mean, you probably even heard of some criticisms about EVs, or perhaps you yourself are questioning whether these kitchen appliances on wheels are really the future of driving. So, let me talk about one of the hottest debates in the automotive world. Why are more owners switching to electric vehicles? Now allow me to break down some of the most controversial arguments against EVs and see if they hold up. Spoiler alert, they don't. Let's go! So after owning nearly 20 petrol cars since the mid-90s, I finally made the plunge by spending close to $200,000 to change into an EV, and also a Chinese EV. This one specifically, the BYD seal. I mean, all my previous cars were petrol. I haven't even owned a hybrid before, and I've driven in quite a variety of cars from normal sedans like the Honda Civic or luxury limos such as the BMW 7 Series, to MPVs like the Honda Odyssey, to higher-end SUVs like the Mercedes GLC Coupe, and possibly every other mix and types of cars, from the extremely no-frills Kia Picanto to the technologically queer Citroën C4 Grand Picasso to the cool Volkswagen EOS. Now this BYD seal is a few firsts for me. Now of course it's my first EV, and second, it is my first Chinese car too. And if you know something about me in the past, judging by the cars that I've owned, right, I have somewhat a bias against Chinese cars. I mean, the Cherry and Geelys during the early 2000s were simply horrible. And I would never imagine myself buying a made-in-China car then. Now, long story short, around a few months before I experienced BYD in the flesh during the premiere in late 2023, I was still having a notion that Chinese cars, BYD or not, are largely inferior in technology, in build quality and in performance. Oh, and most of all, in safety. And also the notion of getting an EV didn't make sense for me, since I stayed in an apartment with no dedicated chargers at home. So even if I was to finally change to an EV, right, it would probably be a Mercedes or BMW then. But after the first test drive in the seal in late 2023, I was so shocked that my whole belief in EVs, especially Chinese EVs, right, began to change. I mean, it wasn't the first time test driving an EV. The first one was the Jaguar I-Pace several years back. I was so taken aback with the insane acceleration and performance. And during my test drive of the seal at the Changi Exhibition Centre, it brought back the same feeling and more, since I had a test drive of the Audi R8 V10 then in a similar circuits. Anyway, let's not turn this into a BYD seal discussion. I want you to see my perspective of why I switched into an EV. So, let me tackle a few rejections that even I had before my belief was changed. Now, the first and most heard rejection is charging takes way too long and there just isn't enough charging stations. And especially if we don't stay in a landed, an EV is not for you. Some call this charging anxiety and perhaps even range anxiety in the past. Well, in terms of range, right, many EVs can run 400 kilometers or more on a single charge. This is more than enough for most drivers for a week of drive. For me, My 460 km after a full charge can last me 2 weeks. So really, range anxiety isn't an issue for most people who aren't driving an EV for Grab, for example. In fact, our tiny Singapore makes it a great country to own EVs because we almost never drive hundreds of kilometers daily. Anyway, the other part of the argument from some folks is on the charging, specifically that EVs take too long to charge and charging stations are hard to find. Now, let's break these two down separately and discuss them separately, right? First, I think more modern EVs nowadays can charge relatively quicker. At some public stations such as this one, right, DC fast chargers can get me from 20% to 80% in just about 30 to 50 minutes. Great for a lunch break or grocery shopping, which I am going to do in a while. And we can find such chargers at shopping malls, such as this one we are in, office buildings, petrol stations, and even HDB car parks, making it convenient to top up while running errands. Now, as for the number of chargers in Singapore, the situation is much better than people think. As of 2024, there are almost like 16,000 public EV charging points island-wide, with plans for 60,000 by 2030. Now, considering Singapore has an estimated of 16,000 EVs on the road, sorry, I really can't find the latest number from LTA yet at the time of this recording, right? Anyway, 16,000, that means there's roughly one public charger for every one EV. This level of coverage is unprecedented in ensuring that finding a charger isn't a problem. And over these few months of EV ownership, I've never once encountered a shopping mall or a HDB car park with all the EV stations occupied. Never. Maybe I'm lucky, or most of the time I'm charging during the so-called off-peak timings, right? But the situation is never like what some people are saying, that EV slots are always full. Okay, let's move on to the second argument. EV ownership is too expensive. So, let's talk about costs. Before I was seriously considering an EV, I always thought that Teslas were terribly expensive. But after visiting SG Carmart, I then realized that the Model 3 is not any more expensive than a good Japanese hybrid like perhaps the Camry. And this BYD seal cost me about 180,000 plus, which at that time when I bought the car, even a Mazda 3 was more expensive. No joke. In Singapore, the government is making EV ownership more attractive through quite a bit of incentives. Now, for example, right, under the EV early adoption incentive, buyers like me, you can save up to $20,000 in rebates on the ARF. Yes, resale value will hit a bit, or rather take a hit a bit, but I personally don't mind an upfront savings earlier in the car ownership cycle. Now today, the BYD seal is priced at around 185,000, and the pretty decent BYD M6 MPV, right, is around 168,000. Comparatively, the similar size category Toyota Camry and Honda Freed, they are at 230,000 and 175,000 respectively. So if you haven't really seen the prices, right, go take a look at them for yourself first. I mean, even the Tesla Model 3 is at roughly about 190,000, which is cheaper than the cheapest Mercedes A-Class. So I hope you don't start to see like no up on the EV owners now. But non-continental EVs from China and the US, they really aren't as exorbitant in prices like those from Mercedes or BMWs. Moreover, many people forget how much we save in EV ownership and maintenance over time. Now in Singapore especially, electricity is cheaper than petrol.
While home charging might be, for a few privileged ones, the robust public charging network are largely affordable. On a full charge, right, I've never spent more than $50 compared to a full tank of petrol, which is at least at about $120, and that's after discount on my other petrol SUV, which is a Peugeot with a 50-litre tank. So overall, I find that my running cost is at least half. Plus, talking about maintenance, right, EVs have much fewer moving parts. So when I went for my first servicing, the reality of no engine oil and gear oil changes, no coolant top-ups, no timing belts, and no exhaust systems, it really hit me. So naturally, it means there are lower maintenance costs per year. So the only exceptions are the road tax will be higher, and I believe tyres could wear out faster too. So for my Cat A Seal, right, I'm paying roughly the same in road tax and insurance as my 2-litre Mercedes in the past. Can't really share much on the tyres and also brakes yet, since my car has clocked only about 4,000 kilometers. But overall, right, the financial benefits of going electric are pretty clear. When we consider the incentives and the long-term savings, right, EV are not just good for the environment, they are also a smart financial move in my opinion too. Talking about environment, the next rejection is that EVs are worse for the environment because of battery production and electricity generation. Now, when I first revealed that I switched to an EV, a Facebook friend immediately commented the negative impact EVs bring to the environment, specifically on the batteries. Yes, many people argue that EVs aren't really green because making the battery produces a lot of emissions. And yes, battery production does have a higher initial carbon footprint compared to building a petrol car. But here's the catch. I strongly believe that EVs make up for that over time. Why? Because EVs are so much more efficient. I mean, EVs, they don't burn fossil fuel, so there's naturally less pollution in the air. And as our electricity grids get greener, I mean, overall, in the world with more renewable energy like wind and solar, right, the emissions from charging, they go down even further. Meanwhile, petrol cars, they will keep on spewing CO2 for their entire lifespan. The real-life example I can give is my recent trip to China. In 2018, when I was last there in Shanghai, right, I could clearly see smoke in the air and smell exhaust everywhere I went. So last month, when I was in Chongqing and Chengdu, two of the biggest cities in China, the air there wasn't any worse than what we have here in Singapore. Maybe there were other factors at play, but I believe that EV adoption would play a relatively large role in helping the environment in the long run. Well, at least net-net, it wouldn't be any worse. Fourth contentious point, the battery will degrade too quickly and become useless. Now honestly, this one is based more on fear than on facts. People worry that EV batteries will degrade quickly, but modern EVs, they are built to last. Most manufacturers, including my BYD dealer, they guarantee their batteries for 8 to sometimes 10 years even, or even more. And in terms of range, 160,000 kilometers or more. And real-world data shows that EV batteries degrade very slowly. I've watched videos of engineers and independent testers claiming that the drop would just be a few percent after several years of use. Let's take BYD's Blade battery as an example. Now, this advanced LFP battery is designed for incredible safety and durability. Unlike conventional lithium-ion batteries, the Blade battery can withstand frequent charging and charging to 100% many times over. Nothing like our iPhone's battery that degrades after like 3 years of use. But then again, Even if an EV is using the conventional, like similar lithium-ion batteries as our phones, right? Since we don't typically charge the car every day like our phone, the batteries would still last for 2 to 3 times longer in it. Plus, coming back to the blade battery, it is resistant to overheating, punctures, and even direct impacts. It's passed extreme safety tests like being run over by heavy vehicles without catching fire or exploding. So inherently, modern EV batteries don't just last longer than ever before, they are also safer. Frankly, whether it is the warranty, real-world performance, or the fear of quick battery degradation, many non-EV drivers' notion is simply outdated. Fifth point, EVs can't handle long road trips. Now, I'm not going to counter this point because I personally haven't driven my EV on a road trip before, but in the forums, right, there are quite many Tesla, BYD and other EV owners sharing their experience in road trips, specifically from Singapore to Malacca, KL or even Genting. I've even read about an owner who made a trip to Thailand. Now the point is this, many EVs today have a range between 400 to some 600 plus kilometers on a single charge, which in theory should easily cover a trip from Singapore to KL. But nonetheless, a check on my app reveals that Malaysia has been rapidly expanding its EV charging network as well, with chargers now available at popular R&R stops, malls and even hotels. There are also charging stations with 6 or more chargers in many bigger towns. So I believe that thanks to apps and onboard EV navigation, right, even on my BYD now, planning a road trip isn't going to be as challenging as it was. I personally look forward to taking a trip to KL this year in my EV. My only complaint is a lack of a big boot in my seal as compared to my petrol SUV. Oh, anyway, enough charging for now.
Now, moving on to another point on EV driving. EVs aren't fun to drive compared to normal ICE cars. I won't go so far as to say that this rejection makes me laugh, but clearly if you think that EVs aren't fun, I humbly believe that you have not driven one. A long time back, I used to drive a Porsche Boxster, and my most recent drivable car was the Mercedes GLC Coupe. And even my convertible Volkswagen EOS, right, can be considered as a good driving car. Nope, they are not sports cars and so on the EVs that we are comparing to. But even in a cheaper EV like this Seal or the Tesla Model 3, you can experience insane 3+ second acceleration. And because the batteries in EVs are low to the ground, right, the weight distribution is almost always better than many ICE cars. Now, honestly, I enjoy driving my Seal today as compared to every car that I've owned. And when I want peace, the EV is extremely quiet, comparable to the 7 Series in the past that I've owned, which was renowned for its refinement. And when I want a little bit more performance, right, this Seal is more than adequate, overtaking the majority of cars and perhaps even some motorbikes on the road. And even when it comes to how connected the steering is to the road, I honestly feel that this Seal doesn't disappoint. Yes, steering feels a little bit light because it is like drive-by-wire, but it's not worse than most of the other drivable cars that I've mentioned earlier. And if you want real fun, like comparing to the Ferraris or Lambos, which frankly, if you have seriously driven them, you understand that most of these kind of cars, they aren't for daily drives. More often than not, you feel more tired after driving these supercars than in a performance EV that's several times cheaper. Anyway, go test drive an EV, especially the higher performance ones. And not only on those 5-kilometer type of roads that the showrooms give you. I'm talking about flying to other countries to test EVs on tracks, and you really experience that EVs are as fun as most ICE cars. Which brings me to my last point. EVs are just a fad. Now, I hate to disappoint anyone who's still thinking this, especially since we are in 2025 now. EV sales have been steadily increasing worldwide, and here in Singapore, 1 out of every 3 cars are registered in 2024 is an EV. And I believe that this figure will further increase in 2025. Elsewhere in the world, in Europe, in Australia, in Thailand, and even in like gas-burning, car-loving US, right? The story is the same. Oh, and especially in China, I couldn't believe the insane proportion of EVs on the road as compared to ICE cars. So major automakers there, especially those in China, as I mentioned, they have been committing billions to transition their fleets to electric, some fully. And many governments are setting bans on new ICE car sales by 2030 to 2040, Singapore included as well. Wait. Did you know this? Future Colin to add a point here. Now, LTA won't allow any new ICE cars to be sold from 2030 onwards. At most, you can buy a hybrid or what we term as a HEV. But with our 60,000 chargers by then, right, I'm sure the majority of car owners would have converted to a BEV or battery EV. So honestly, the global push for carbon neutrality, the advancement in battery technology, and the rapid growth in charging stations and technology would make EVs the future, not just a temporary trend. Anyway, back to the video. So back to my initial point on feeling marginalised or even bullied on the road as an EV driver. Now, my point to them is this. The EV is going to be a major structural change, just like how computers have completely replaced typewriters and film cameras are for hobbies only. So I believe that EV will replace ICE cars sooner or later. And upon witnessing how many countries are embracing this change, right? Well, I believe our ICE car here in Singapore won't last another COE cycle. To those people who still think that EV technology or the infrastructure isn't matured enough, or that EV themselves are stupid or soulless to drive, I don't need you to go back on your belief. I just urge you to go try out and experience an EV for yourself. Now, go rent one over the weekend, heck, even go for one of those short 5-kilometer test drives from authorized dealers. I'm telling you, you may laugh at us today, but in a short few years' time, I hate to say this, you will be the dinosaur, the one who will feel marginalized, get ridiculed, and perhaps even bullied by EV drivers on the road. Thanks for watching my rant. Now, I feel that it is important to share my thoughts on this matter, since just a short time back, I was harboring the same misconceptions on EV ownership. Now, let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree on any of the points that I've mentioned. And if you have any suggestions for me to do another video on EVs, please let me know too. Now, remember to subscribe to this channel and like this video if you haven't. My name is Colin, and I run a video production company called Learns, if you're wondering. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.